Gillian, reflecting on 2023 in the field of customer success, how would you characterize the year? Can you share some key lessons that stood out for you?
I'm going to say it was an unpredictable year. That's a good way to put it. That's probably for me personally, but also for the landscape of customer success and tech. It was the first full year with the new year post-pandemic. So a lot of offices reopening and seeing roles defined as remote, hybrid, or on-site. I think hybrid especially can mean a lot of different things. So there's one thing there. And the introduction of ChatGPT and, of course, other new AI tools and AI incorporated into existing applications as well. And then an increased number of layoffs and subsequently a lot of people searching for work too. So the key lessons stood out for me. I'm going to say in remote team environments, the communication needs to be more deliberate. So, when you're in an office with people, there's communication that happens organically. You overhear other people's conversations even, and you learn, especially if you're new to an organization and you're onboarding, you kind of learn the branding and the culture just by osmosis, you could say. But in the remote environment, all of that needs to be much more deliberate. And with that, multi-directional 360-degree feedback for internal teams. And with a lot of new people joining a company with distributed team structure, it's less likely there'll be an opportunity for that organic feedback. So that needs to be more deliberate, I would say.
If there's one thing you could have done differently from a CS perspective last year, what would that be?
Last year, I joined a new company, and part of that process was to outline my strategic plan. But that was more from the initial onboarding, objectively, what I was going to do. But once you get in the door and things are happening, things change and you adapt. And then with other changes going on with the teams and things, I'd say I would have done a lot more to communicate and really share my plan, I guess, that was iterated for the long game. We always look for low-hanging fruit and quick wins and what can be done quickly. And in tech, especially, I think there's always the pressure to get things done and see outcomes quickly. But there's the long game too. And there's things that you have to plan for in the long term, especially when you're onboarding new people in any part of the company, especially if there's a more complex product. Either way, there's a lot to learn. So there's a long game. And of course, considering our customers, they're at the forefront. So we don't want it to be obvious to customers. If we've got a lot going on and doing a lot of internal training, we need to have a really strong front for customers. I mean, the example for me there, it was also like hiring and onboarding new CSMs specifically and having key accounts that were longtime customers. So they knew our product really well and getting their feedback as well. For me, introducing success plan playbooks for new CSMs. And that was something for customers as well, having that transparent part of that too, so that they were part of the goal setting and having a logical outcome approach, making it more clear to my leadership, as I mentioned before, and a form of managing up. So even as a leader, I'm thinking, okay, I'm leading a team, but also that leadership needs to have confidence in what's going on too.
Speaking about how CS can help other departments and support at a higher level, I want to tackle a topic that we also approached on our blog, how CS can act as a silent architect in supporting other teams. I'm curious about your experience with Voice of the Customer's programs. How did you harness these insights to assist the product team?
I have examples here from a company I worked at a couple of years ago where I implemented a Voice of the Customer program. And the way that I got it in the door was our CEO really liked having an NPS score. He was very adamant that we needed to have that. So that was the foot in the door. And I thought, okay, well, it was important that I, even with just the NPS score, had good segmentation on our sampling for the deployment to our customers of the NPS survey, because we had multilingual for one thing. A lot of the end users were only Spanish speaking. So we needed to make sure that we weren't missing out on the feedback from most of our users. So there was the multilingual aspect, and then also different levels of stakeholders to have a very different perspective when they're giving their score. So at least if I had my kind of approval, shall we say, to launch that NPS survey. And so then what I did was worked with product. We were a fairly small company, so I was pretty close to working with product anyways, and really understanding what it was that they needed to know more about to design and develop the product further and ongoing and influence the roadmap there so that our priorities were aligned with customer priorities too, and what made sense for helping to define what our ideal customer profile was. And that even goes for marketing, of course, as much as any and sales. So taking those from that discovery internally and adding questions to the NPS question so that we could have deeper insights. So yeah, having a lot of research best practices instilled in me from almost 6 years at a consumer insights platform as a CSM there. And that's always why it's a bit of a passion in my mind when I'm working with customers and then internal product teams or internal teams, a lot of times product, to get deeper and more valuable insights from our customers.
How does this contribute to demonstrating the real value of customer success initiatives to your customers?
So we were able to take action on the feedback. There is a lot of single choice questions direct. We would get data from that, and that would be quantitative. But then also there's a lot of qualitative information that I would get a capture as well. So that especially took a little bit of effort, but it's worth it to categorize into education, tech support, product development, for example. So with those different areas, especially with tech support, we discovered some things that was actually maybe a blocker or barrier to users actually leveraging the product altogether. So that was important to resolve that fairly quickly. And then education. Sometimes people give feedback and you realize, oh, I don't think that they are using that feature properly, or that's not how it was intended. So whether it's working with my day-to-day contact or however that might look, or if it's like writing an article for every user to reference, there's lots of education opportunities that we came across. So one example that we did was creating an FAQ, and you think, oh, why did we not have that? But what we had was more something that was from an onboarding perspective, but then this was from a tech support perspective too, of ongoing and having an FAQ available for people in a support environment. Yeah, testimonials were useful in business reviews with customers as well. That goes a long way when you're working with other leaders, stakeholders who are leaders, and they don't necessarily see the product itself, and they don't have that clear picture of, are we really getting value? Or we might provide some numbers, but when they see that there's users that are passionate about using the product too, that really is an extra factor there. That's a lot of leverage. So we were able to do some productivity analysis that showed a correlation between our product data and our customers' productivity data to show that they had increased productivity due to the positive outcomes from using our product. So that was a good sort of an ROI there with actual data.
The voice of the customers programs and their role in supporting product teams. We know that boosting product adoption and usage is definitely a key focus for CS teams. And you've built successful programs with a proven track record in this area. What was your strategy behind achieving such success?
Yeah, the product team needed a lot of user feedback when they were designing several new UI designs. And I kind of alluded to that already. There was mobile and desktop applications, as well as a wearable device, so a hardware product as well. And there were different user types, so including end users, supervisors, managers, and then in terms of stakeholders, there's leadership that wasn't. They were very removed, but they were also the decision makers. So customers were able to use data and feedback to champion the use of our product and make business decisions such as staffing schedules. So we had data that informed what would be the most productive schedule for 24-hour operations in manufacturing. So I think having those actionable outcomes is really what shows the success in a Voice of the Customer program.
Building and deploying a CS strategy can't be done without a proper team in place. And it's all about having the right people doing the right things right. So when it comes to having the right people, what's that one skill in your recruitment process that you never compromise on?
Empathy. Other people would maybe use the same answer, but this is one that always comes back. I've used it in bios to describe my approach to customer success in the past, because the ability for people to put themselves in someone else's shoes is really important. It's not only self-awareness, but it's really understanding the perspective of the people that we are trying to, like, it's their problems that we're trying to solve. So that's when we're thinking about customers and products, but also internally with colleagues and people on our teams that we're coaching and we're leading. We have to understand where they're coming from. You can never get away from empathy being really important.
And what does a CS team need in order to be performing above expectations?
The team needs to feel supported and valued, especially if we are working in distributed remote environments. You don't get that opportunity to show each other support as easily. I mean, we have tools like Slack, but the communication there can be quite flat. I think there's the individual part and then there's the team part that I think even takes a little more work for people to feel that they can support each other and feel supported by the company. So part of that is regular feedback and planning and celebrating the wins. I know that's one thing I've caught myself where we're so driven to goals and outcomes and we achieve things. And even if we acknowledge them, then we're right on to the next thing. So it's important to look where the accomplishments and how much we learn that's informing us which direction to go forward.
How crucial is choosing the right tools and technology for a CS team's success?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. For me, I can visualize different scenarios and different companies I've worked at. And it really depends on what stage of maturity a company is at for me, and as well as the customers, how mature the customers are too, in terms of their adaptation of the value that they're getting from your product. So the size of the company is part of that maturity in terms of the number of employees, but it's also the size of the customer portfolio too. Those are not always, often not parallel numbers because it depends as well the type of user, like the product itself is this enterprise. And we have a couple of really big customers or what that looks like. So it's important to be organized at any stage. I'll say that. And what the tools are that it takes to be organized might be different as well. So if you have a lot of different customers, you're going to want a CRM earlier than if you just have, say, 10 customers. That CRM, I think it's important to get that implemented early, but within reason, because maybe there's other priorities when you need to think about the deeper relationships with a small number of customers. Maybe there's a different tool that's important there. It definitely depends. And you don't want to have a tool without already having a plan. When I say tool, I mean, there's a lot of different CS, customer success platforms out there and onboarding platforms as well. Before you can implement those, you have to know what you're going to do with it and what your strategy is. That's the other part of it. There needs to be a means of measuring performance, identifying churn, renewing contracts, and capturing customer feedback. So if you can manage all of that without a tool and really be clear about what you need in the tool, I think that's a good way to do it. So we're all familiar with spreadsheets as being one of those early tools and then building out from there. Same with Playbooks. There's a lot you can do without a platform that will maybe inform to choose a platform that's appropriate.
What's the difference between a good CS team and a great CS team?
A great CS team has collaborative relationships with nearly every other function in the organization and knows their resources and having great relationships with the customers. So in the example of high touch and strategic accounts, there's a lot of multi-threaded relationships. It's a popular term that I see a lot of people using. And then they lift each other up. That's the other thing. So every customer is a little bit different. And so sometimes there's a lot to learn from each other. And if we have a team, it's kind of alluding to that before too, of feeling supported as a team and individuals, but then also a great team will lift each other up and support each other.
What are some typical mistakes that often lead to failure or underperformance? But more importantly, how would you suggest fixing each of these issues?
I'm going to say not getting to the bottom of customer feedback and details getting lost in translation between customers and product managers, especially if you have a product team that's quite removed from the customer and what they have to say. So having a process for getting the basic details from customers and facilitating recorded direct interactions between customers and the product owner or the product team in some way. I think it depends on the product a little bit, but this is coming from working on complex products, but as a result of the customers having really complex needs. And then it's the challenge of, as a company, not getting drawn into solving for one customer's problems that maybe are completely different from another's, where we need to have that ideal customer profile where there's a product that is adding value, but more than just adding value, solving the problem across the board as much as possible. So that can be a challenge in some industries where there isn't necessarily a standard for the same type of work, and because they haven't had technology before. So there's a balance of starting to create some standards for an industry potentially, and looking at what makes the most sense across different organizations using your product. So the failure to not hear all of the voices and really understand the complexity of, or the granularity of the complexities, if that's sort of part of the scenario.
What experience in your past stand out as the hands down worst way to do CS?
So my answer here is sending weekly emails that have the same usage metrics for every customer. And sometimes it ends up being the same numbers and figures as well each week if things aren't changing from the same customer. So, and this partly, I'm going to say it comes from the past. This is from early days of CS. So it's probably the same for a lot of people. And those same companies are not doing that anymore. The customer success has evolved. And if you catch yourself doing something where you, as a leader, or even if it's as an individual contributor, probably you're going to spot this before anybody else, because you're the one actually carrying through and doing these tasks that are quite tactical that actually don't make sense anymore. Maybe it did at one time. So it's good to share that and look for solutions to what could be done differently. But yeah, if it's a waste of resources, even if it's automated, if it's not valuable to the customer, it's going to be more detrimental than anything. You have to have interpretation of data. And usage doesn't mean anything if people aren't solving for a need. So if you're talking about, you've got a lot of your employees, they're logging in, they're using the product, but are they getting any value from the product? Or are they just logging in and they're not actually getting the value from it? Or poor user experience. So the benefit of the tool, if it's not being experienced by the appropriate stakeholders, then the data has to be useful and taking the next step of interpreting that data. We talk about being trusted advisors, for example. The interesting part now, we've got a lot more automation and now AI, us level up from just automation. So how do we leverage that so it's still a human experience?
What's the latest mistake you've made in your executive CS role that turned into a valuable learning experience?
I'll give my answer and then at the end tie it together. So misunderstanding a deadline, that in itself, it's okay. That can happen easily. But in this case, I was doing a recorded interview with a customer, and it was the first one we were doing. So I was doing it as one of the leaders. And I all of a sudden found myself, I had only a day or two to do this because I was going on a work trip. And I thought, I'm going to be on the road. And then when am I going to have time to do this? And I hadn't yet used ChatGPT. So this recorded interview with the customer was about the day in the life of a customer. And then also, of course, how our product fits in. It was a very helpful tool. And my prompt was something along the lines of, this is the company and the product. This is the customer profile, the user profile. And I need 20 questions to ask in an interview to understand a day in the life of this person. And I tweaked the questions that came out, but they were very good and saved me a ton of time, actually. Maybe the questions were even better than what I might have come up with in some ways. So it was a good kind of a silver lining there of it forced me to do something that I hadn't done before and ended up being all the better for it. Of course, now I use it quite a bit.
What piece of advice would you offer to CS executives today, drawing from your own lessons learned?
being intentional about training and facilitating a truly customer-centric organization and having revenue numbers tied to measuring CS performance. That one, I almost hesitate a little bit, but you do need to have metrics with CS. And right now, revenue is so important. I guess it does depend on if the CS team is fully owning renewals, for example, or upsell, or what that looks like. But yeah, for CS to really be tied to value, it makes sense to have revenue numbers associated with CS performance. CS are spending the most in-depth time with the customers, so it makes sense.
As we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future. What are your predictions for the customer success industry in 2024? Are there any trends or changes you foresee that we should all be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I like this one. Everybody's doing or done their predictions for 2024. So I thought about this before seeing what everybody else wrote. And then like on LinkedIn, when I say what everyone else is writing. So yeah, my prediction for the customer success industry in 2024 is that there will be a continuation of a lot of the trends that developed in 2023. To be specific, AI and automation of CS operations incorporated it to enable CSMs to spend less time on administrative tasks. Digital CS programs that are designed for customers at all revenue-based segments, so SMB, mid-market, and enterprise, rather than the original that digital was probably 2-3 years ago. I feel like that was where the focus was. Digital was for low touch, small customers, but there is a huge space for digital programs for enterprise. So that the time that we do spend with high value customers is what needs to be a human touch. We don't need to use our time for something that we could have AI doing. And more one-to-many approaches, but also more personalized and strategic outcomes based on human interactions with customers. Companies are defining their ideal customer profile more now and being more disciplined about signing on customers that fit that ICP. I think that's becoming more important now just because we are trying to do more with less. So we don't have that space to have a customer that's not bringing the company value. And companies will have better data in their products for customers to leverage without support of a CSM, for example. The data is really important for our customers to have to be experiencing value. And a couple more that I have, customer success managers need to have access to internal customer revenue data, whether they're owning it or not. It's really key to the success of a CS and customer-facing product data to be able to ensure that their customers are realizing the value of their subscription and ROI. So related to that, more CS functions will own the revenue for expansion, upsell, and cross-sell businesses. That's my observation. But that is a change in skill set. And, that could be a lot of why we're seeing a lot of movement around in CS. The focus on what skill sets is changing too. And lastly, I expect there will be a continued increase in CS jobs posted in sectors experiencing growth and the need for improved automation and cybersecurity. So healthcare, the legal sector, construction, and enterprise level administration. Those are all industries that I don't want to say late to the party, but slower to adopt technology in general. And a lot of it due to the large scale aspect of it and the privacy and data security concerns as well. I foresee there being a lot more jobs in those sectors of tech.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for sharing your insights with me today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I look forward to seeing how your prediction for the customer success industry unfold in 2024.
Thank you very much.